Monday. Welcome to the Crash Chords podcast.
This is released on Thursday.
Thursday. Yeah, but we record on a Monday most of the time.
That's true.
There's that.
It's
But if you tell them something bad will happen,
No,
It's
we're dating our
I'm
content.
led to believe.
I'm reminiscent of when
We're
Exactly.
not really dating. We're
4 days
dating.
behind. Oh.
We're dating
Excuse me, 3
our
days behind.
content.
Sometimes 4 days,
It
though.
leads me to believe.
Sometimes too.
It reminds me rather of when Paul F. Tompkins started his podcast. He used to say, "Good evening, everyone," at the start of his podcast, and people would give him crap like, "Well, I'm not listening to it at night." So then he started introducing the podcast. It's nighttime on the internet. Welcome to Paul F. Tompkins' podcast.
Nighttime in the internet. Yes.
It's nighttime somewhere.
Yeah,
That's true. It's always nighttime somewhere.
that's true because the Earth is round and not three-sided.
Wait, no, that still wouldn't.
Well,
first of all,
What?
that would make us a
Triangle.
No, there's no such thing as a three-sided, three-dimensional shape without any curves. I mean, you still have to put curves in there, and that was still
Unless we were a giant floating pyramid. No, that's still four sides, right?
That's still
four.
No, it's 5
or
sides.
or more, depending
A pyramid
upon
is 5 sides.
a classical pyramid is 4 triangles and a square.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
The smallest
You still call them sides, though.
dodecahedron
one
is
you
still
can't see.
4-sided with 4 triangles. The D4 in nerd terms.
Right.
That is the smallest three-dimensional space that
don't think Matt's
contains flat surfaces.
I don't think Matt's appreciating any of this right now.
And he's a nerd, so he should.
He should.
You
Yeah.
say that like you're both not nerds.
No, I'm saying you should, because we do appreciate
No,
it.
we're just delineating our brands right now. That's all.
Everyone's a different kind of nerd.
Everyone's a
Like
very
Steve's a
apparent.
train nerd.
And a word nerd, because I didn't quite catch delineating.
And a
Delineating.
geography nerd. Did you know the capital of Kazakhstan is Astana?
Now I do, I guess, until I forget it.
All right, good.
Wait, which one's Kazakhstan?
That's the big one.
Okay. No, I do know how that thing is made up, but that's
I
that
want a
term.
big one.
Yeah, it's a big stand.
You stop learning about
It's a big
history and
stand.
geography.
We
and-
call him Big Stan. He
in
comes
school
by every night.
at like 1975 and stuff like that. That's before the fall of the Soviet Union, because they kind of just go, "Oh, the Soviet Union fell in the 90s," and then all of a sudden there was peace on Earth, and they were wrong. But that's besides the point.
No, in that case, it's a fair question because when they lost the Big Stand, they lost the biggest part of the former Mother Russia.
Well, and they lost Ukraine, which was another big chunk.
Yeah,
And that was
nowhere
a
near as big
huge.
as Kazakhstan.
Well, as a single unit, it is. It's bigger.
No, Kazakhstan is huge.
Yeah, but
Like 3 times Ukraine.
I've seen maps. No, it's not.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, I'm going to be looking this up on Wikipedia while Matt goes into whatever announcements we have.
Matt?
I don't really have anything this week. Keep checking back at autographs. By now, the newest one should be YT Cracker. I believe, anyway. And so please go check that out. Of course, keep writing reviews for us. Check out the article that Steve posted pointing towards NPR's quest to find the next podcast and other podcasts to talk about, and submit your favorite content from ours or from autographs, either or both, optimally.
This is not a good announcement. This is the same old stuff. All right.
Sometimes we have to
This is
remind our audience.
There's a
Everyone
chance to
had
dig us out of this hole.
Everyone's had an intense Passover. It's over by now. They're breadless and then getting back into their gluten goodness.
You know what? Steve was right. I just have to bring this up. Steve is, in fact, right. And it's because
Yeah,
of
I knew I was right.
Well, it's a classical curve of how Eurocentric world views itself, that Kazakhstan looks a lot smaller than you'd actually think it is. Like when you see maps.
So
with
when
Europe
I
in the
said it
middle-
was the Big Stand, that meant nothing at all.
Well, there's a lot of stands out there and have been over the years, ever since the Eastern Bloc fell.
Let's rewind and reiterate. Geography nerd.
They don't need to rewind. You just repeated it.
Unless I edit that back in.
Please don't.
No, the possibilities come to life.
We should be silent so he has to put in another cricket.
There's a very interesting website called Map Fight.
We haven't had crickets in ages.
No,
Anyway.
it's all about different sizes of places to
John
one
doesn't
another.
like
This
that.
is awesome. I have to
Bookmark that
it's
site.
getting bookmarked right now.
All right, well, since the segue is not being made apparent, I will just move on to today's album. Sufjan Stevens, an artist that I've often mentioned on the podcast, though perhaps sadly only in context of a common thread, that being his associated act with 2 artists we reviewed in the podcast and who I hold in pretty high esteem, them being Shower Warden of My Brightest Diamond and Annie Clark of St. Vincent, episodes 111 and 86 respectively. So apparently, about a decade ago, both of these women were formerly part of Sufjan Stevens' troupe, a large ensemble, many instrumentalists, many backup singers, and even though Sufjan himself is a multi-instrumentalist and multi-tracks many instruments on his albums himself, for the sake of the tour at least, from what I gather, he does port out the work to other talents. And I found that he associates himself with pretty incredible talents, be that for his ear for quality auditions, or perhaps chance, or perhaps like the great adage, great minds think alike. Anyway, he founded his own label called Asthmatic Kitty, which at least My Brightest Diamond is under and signed to. Now, as to his own work, it's a little more vague and difficult to pin down than I think My Brightest Diamond or St. Vincent. For one, he's been at it longer, and he's gone through several phases. His earlier work was more of a lo-fi, sort of a folk sound. That's what you get on and out. His early album, Seven Swans. And he also dabbled with electronica. And then finally, when he was very acclaimed, what he was acclaimed for, that was his very lush, symphonic, all-encompassing orchestral style. Epitomized, I would say, probably by Illinois, his 2005 album, which was part of a gimmick where he was supposed to do an album for every U.S. state, and he got about as far as Illinois and Michigan. So it was kind of a lark to begin with. But out of that, we did get Illinois, which is, in my opinion, an out-and-out masterpiece. I also loved the fact that he favored absurdly long track titles, such as A Short Reprise for Mary Todd, who went insane, but for very good reasons. Or A Conjunction of Drones, simulating the way in which Sufjan Stevens has an existential crisis in the Great Godfrey Maze. Fun guy. I kind of latched onto that album, but I always tiptoed around his other work. There are times that I think that he's sort of on another plane, like not in terms of musical complexity necessarily, but like in vagaries. The fact that he's channeling a mood that's so personal, you need to kind of be in the right mindset to go forward. A couple other things about him, though you will probably see why there's an inherent faux pas in me mentioning this, but especially for today's album, it should be noted that there's a lot of spiritual allusions in his work. I believe he's a practicing Christian. I don't know what denomination, but at times I'm sure the Christian community would have loved to have labeled him a contemporary Christian music artist, but they can't have him, because according to an interview he gave to the Village Voice, he says that I don't think music media is the real forum for theological discussions. I think I've said things and sung about things that probably weren't appropriate for this kind of forum, and I just don't feel like it's my place or my work to be making claims and statements, because I often think it's misunderstood. I've always respected that outlook, especially considering what we do. It's very easy to get like this runaway notion about something, but I think that having a reference point has always enhanced, having that reference point particularly, has always enhanced his already heaping palette of imagery. And that brings us to the present. Let's get the common knowledge stuff out of the way. Today's album, Carrie and Lowell, as any quick Google search will tell you, is a direct epitaph to the 2012 death of his mother, Carrie, from stomach cancer. So, considering that there's a loss here, no trace of the vastness that was Illinois can really be heard on this album. With respect to his discography, this is unquestionably his thinnest sound yet. He was aiming to bring forth that loss on this album, and I think through that gap, through that sparseness, he definitely succeeded. Even like a 5-second sample of this album would probably exemplify that goal, at least. But we'll be looking at a lot of things here. Also, just for reference, Lowell would be his stepfather and co-founder of his label, Asthmatic Kitty. So, with that, I think we'll dive right in.
The first track is Death with Dignity, which, in title alone, is a powerful statement to make. The idea of dying with dignity, which not a lot of people do. Some people are very scared when they're going, because it's said, and I obviously have no personal experience, as I am still alive, but I'm told that a lot of people have stated that when they're getting close to that time, they know it's coming. They can feel it. They know that at that end.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, you just know.
Well, obviously, considering this is looking at cancer, I mean, the what we're led to believe is that she and he and everyone around them had known for quite some time.
Yeah. So this album and track starts with finger-picking guitar intro, very folk-sounding, kind of sweet,
It instantly eases you.
Yeah.
It's instantly I want to say, pseudo-iconic part of early folk indie, that is. It's a great way to begin something, especially if he knows he's going to be building into tragedy. The whole thing is, he doesn't really give you a chance to build into tragedy. Almost right away, just the melancholy that's just it's pervasive in this track.
Well, see, that's not exactly what I thought. I didn't think the melancholy was pervasive right up front. I actually thought that it was really more painting the emotional center between him and his mother. And I thought it was very, very sweet. Like, on one hand, I gotta confess, I kind of wanted to, I guess, show you guys, seeing as this is my pick of the week, I wanted to show you more of his symphonic side. I had no idea what to expect, and I picked it last week because, well, this actually, as at the moment I announced it was going to be released the very next day. So then we spent a week with it, and I was a little surprised. It was very lo-fi, very folk, and it's been credited as going back to his earlier work. But, you know, we've had a lot of folk in our podcast compendium, so I guess as far as giving you something new, that wasn't so much of a success. But that reticence after first few bars here almost immediately gave way to tears on this opening track. And it set a pretty crazy standard for this album, I think, for me, just in terms of melodic value. It's very simple, it's true. It's just this simple, like, 4/4 banjo groove. Banjo, should be also mentioned, is one of his primary instruments, amongst many. So I guess you really can't say primary. But it's just the simple banjo groove centering around E minor, lots of vague suspensions and major sevenths, great harmonies, very dense harmonies. But it's his vocals, and specifically the melody there, that really carried this forward, and I think pushed it well and above even my experience with the very lighthearted, but with that melancholy touch for sure, lighthearted folk. You know, it's sparse, at the same time it packs an emotional punch.
Yes. Well, it's instantly sweet, but then followed by a distinct coldness. Even though the song has this bittersweet sound, once you run into the lyrics and actually listen to what he's saying, you get an awareness for what he's singing about and how personal this is, and it instantly chills the track because you it's putting you in his shoes.
Yeah, let's actually read a few lyrics and then dive back into music, because obviously, since you can't really, again, go into this album without knowing that right up front that it's about the death of his mother, let's address some of that. Spirit of my silence, I can hear you, but I'm afraid to be near you, and I don't know where to begin. I don't know where to begin. Somewhere in the desert there's a forest and an acre before us, but I don't know where to begin. I don't know where to begin. Now, specifically in that I'm afraid to be near you, I don't know where to begin. Like, this is kind of contrasting the points that, like, John mentioned before. Like, it doesn't really give you a time to, like, sit in the tragedy. In a sense, I feel like this is in that most immediate wake of the moment that it tries to sort of capture on the music front. You know, in the lighthearted banjo ditty, it tries to capture, like, this the cheerful times, as it were, but then the lyrics really pack the punch of being at a loss for words because he himself is dealing with a loss.
When you combine that with the doubling vocals,
yeah, that's a point that I was gonna slingshot back to.
It does come across for me as, while uplifting, and his voice does have heights to it. It's not a low growl or anything like that, which usually would accompany a lot of these ideas, a lot of, well, just depression in general. It is a higher, brighter part of the song that, honestly, when paired with the banjo, does not come across as melancholy. But
no,
just the context, it's the context of the lyrics that, obviously, it's obvious he's got a loss for words. It's obvious that something just hit him. And that foreshadowing he's doing here does not let you just stay lighthearted. The foreshadowing is right in the front. And that's what I meant by the melancholy hits you really hard. The sadness hits you really hard in the beginning because you know it's ending in tears. This is not a beginning. This is not a middle. This is the beginning of an ending of something that was just going to end in tears.
Yeah, which sort of says, like, even if you avoid what I said earlier, you know, doing your quick Google search, you don't even really need to do that. The album itself really speaks for it. And, of course, the album cover itself. That's another important thing to mention. It's a picture of, I believe, his mother and his stepfather, Carrie and Lowell. But the style of the picture is that sort of classic faded photo. But not just faded. If you look closely, there's crack marks all over it, as if it were like
a scanned physical photo.
No, not scanned, but as if it were behind glass, like in a frame, and then the frame was shattered a little bit.
Oh.
And this song lyrically ends with, I forgive you, mother, I can hear you, and I long to be near you, but every road leads to an end. Yes, every road leads to an end. Your apparition passes through me in the willows and 5 red hens. You'll never see us again. You'll never see us again.
Oh.
I mean, he's closing a already kind of uplifting, if you're ignoring what's actually being said, song. But obviously darker tones are being built here. And then he ends it on a very, very dour note.
Yeah.
Well, that's where we get back to the instrumentation, because between the piano work, the instrumental kind of movements between the lyrics, and then, of course, the entire instrumental outro, you get that coldness that was hinted at in the track and made obvious in the lyrics, very obvious in the instrumentation at the end.
That and his vocals itself, and that was the point that John was starting to bring up, and I wanted to go into a little more detail there. He mentioned that there were 2 sets of vocals, sort of like this strange, like doubling, almost exactly, pitch for pitch, it seems, on the main melodic line. But it very well could be another tactic. I heard this was all recorded in his home studio, for instance, so it sounds thin for that reason. It doesn't have the grandeur of lots of studio equipment, but granted, I'm sure he has a pretty good setup. It could very well just be 2 microphones set up against him on the same exact track, and then each one is mixed slightly differently. But out of which both you get sort of a whisper, but then at times there's these little subtle departures, like there might be a 3rd track there that takes harmonies, and then sometimes rather than taking harmonies, it takes the delays, like a little bit of a call response later. I mean, that might have been more toward like what is that song you sing for the dead? What is that song you sing for a dead? Somewhere around there in the 2nd verse, it starts to take these like call and response, and then the real crux point here, what I could almost call the chorus, even though it's almost silly to break down a track like this into verse and chorus, is another line that you had read. Your apparition passes through me in the willows of 5 red hens, and that's one of about 3 appearances here where he reaches the true peak of this track. The first one being, again I lost my strength completely. Oh, be near me, tired old mare. And at that moment, he really just belts it on completely. And as he says completely, he holds the tone in falsetto, and it sounds so raw. You feel the emotional connection just in this simplistic melody here. It's gorgeous.
It's also one of the times when the doubling effect seems to merge, where you don't really hear 2 people singing at once or him singing twice. It's just one single note. It unifies the 2 of them together. It's not fully chilling, but it's getting there. And for an opening track, it's great not to truly do something that might alienate. And if you were to really go that chilling that quickly, I'd have a huge problem of seeing anything live up to it. Mm-hmm. But it does a great job of setting the stage because it's showing... It's foreshadowing again. It's foreshadowing something that's going to happen later in the album.
Well, I think the strongest...
Yeah, foreshadow is not really the word that I would use, considering I think the entire album exists in the wake.
It's just a preview of what's coming.
It's a preview of other avenues that he will use to address the same loss.
Exactly.
I think that the instrumental outro is really the strongest point to that. I mean, it goes from something that's relatively bittersweet or sweet to something much darker. He uses a lot of more electronic tones, and this is a thing that he'll come back to throughout the whole album. He'll come back to these electronic tones and keys that aren't everywhere. At
that moment, I didn't hear it so much as electronic tones. I think it was more that of like a choir that existed alongside maybe some vague violin work. But the thing is the fact that both of them are like drenched, I've used this phrase before, drenched in reverb, and here it couldn't be truer. It sounds as if it's being played in a cathedral, such that you get kind of this blending effect between this light falsetto choiring in the background and these violins overhead. And within that, you even get like these little subtle details. Like, for instance, there's a slide present where they both like fall down, and you get this reverb choir that slides down to the major home and then attacks on the 7th. And all of this is just amidst that mist. And that's this like loss that exists at the tail end of this track, like encompassing the hole in his life, as it were.
And it's the first time that I guess the warmth of his music is gone. Yeah. It's a cold chill coming into this song. It's something that just trickles down the edge of the spine. I loved it. I think it was a great period to put on this first statement, this first reaction to what's going on around him.
Well, I think Steve hit the nail on the head and said, this is the hole that was left behind. This song is him trying to put a happy face on something very tragic, and then it crashes into this reality at the end of the song.
Right, and that's why there's really just those two heights that this reaches, as far as one being that tearfully beautiful falsetto that he reaches on each of those phrases. Again, I lost my strength completely. Oh, be near me, tired old mare. And then again, I see the signal searchlight strike me in the window of my room. Well, I've got nothing to prove. And he just, I've got nothing to prove. That showed almost the same, sense of just defeatedness, that I don't think I've heard since the vocals that we had back with Darren Charles and Godsticks. The kind of just natural manner of speaking. And it's true that all this emotion is just snuffed out with that final outro. It was a great duality for me, and as I said, set the standard pretty high, I think, for this album. At the same time, I always also realize I'm laying on the feels here pretty early in today's podcast, but it's the kind of song that I think just makes you want to give your mother a hug. And this will be even more apparent the further you go into this, the wake of death, but at least this one still keeps that emotional connection alive.
Two things. One, I just want to take a moment so we can all acknowledge in the audience with us that Steve used the word feels. Number two...
Yes, I hate that word, too.
Number two, I want to acknowledge that I think that, yes, this song especially makes you, it makes you think of your own mother or a love you have for a family member. But I think as the album progresses, it's more just a general want for the person you care so much about, or the terrifying void that someone you truly care about can leave in your life. Mother, lover, father, anyone. This is about his mother, but I think we get more general just grief and struggle towards the latter half of the album that could be identified with anybody.
I agree. I think the grief is more later, but the whole is present here, and the emotional connection is, most importantly, is established. As we move on to track 2, Should Have Known Better, we start addressing this from different angles. Not yet at the full grief. In fact, we take little breathers from that, weighted grief and dealing with death, and we start sort of touching upon, I think, lighter things. For instance, there's a lot of nostalgia in this track that really, really strikes me. In the lyrics and of the overall tone, I should probably say this is more toward a lighter, more familiar style of folk that I would probably attach to either Simon and Garfunkel for a lot of people, and then for me it went to a more recent thing, Kings of Convenience, and specifically their album Riot on an Empty Street back in 2004, which really hammered home this almost light-hearted style of folk, and that's really the way this begins.
It's got this kind of wandering minstrel kind of feel, and it definitely gives this sound where the previous track was more definitely indie folk, kind of more modern. This definitely feels a little further back. There's definitely an influence here of either band or both, for sure. But what I really like also about this track is it's not just a steady kind of moving track. He does take pauses here. This track structure, while slightly different enough that it still gives you a little variety, but still there's no big swells, there's no giant masses of instruments. It's still the same stripped down sound we had in the previous track.
Yeah, no, as for the whole of it, it almost strikes me as this beachside melody, at least the way the guitar and banjo sync up in this, because I think for the most part they're linked up for the duration. It almost strikes me as comes across as a ukulele almost. It seems very, very free flowing, but the vocals and the lyrics do take that a different direction.
It's those pauses at the end of the vocal phrases, at the end of the different verses. He ends up breaking his almost metronome style of singing with the first 4 lines of each verse and speeds up that fifth line. And then pauses. No sounds from his voice, which is kind of different because the breakup doesn't change anything musically, or at least nothing dramatically, but it comes across as almost an anti-echo, as sort of an exclamation point without actually exclaiming anything on the last part of those phrases.
Yeah, there's this sort of variation in speed as he goes through the verses. For instance, the first verse, I should have known better to see what I could see, my black shroud. He really takes his time with that phrase, holding down my feelings, a pillar for my enemies. And that one is really, really quick. It kind of speed, and then there's that pause. Right after that, there's this gap that just you kind of sit with. And that made me realize that, in a sense, there's really not a change in tone. The tonal change was really more deceptive, just because the overall groove, as you said, Matt, doesn't really hit the same heights. And it seems almost like the vocals themselves don't really reach the same falsetto heights that the previous track did either. So at first, I was almost thinking this was a little bit of a kind of an inevitable lighthearted turn, but also perhaps a fault in that the first track was so impactful. Perhaps it was going to be one of those top-heavy albums.
Yeah, but, I mean, for sure, this track, though, on a whole, especially in the beginning, gives you a warmer feeling than the last track did. Like, speaking to what you said about how it kind of almost felt like it was on a beach, just ignoring the lyrics for a moment, the sounds did give you that kind of warmth, sunny feeling, which could allude to this positive upturn that we thought we were going to get. But as we focus more on the lyrics, it definitely is still kind of cold, and we get more of that as we get towards the center of the song.
A little cold, but still, it's a mix.
Yeah.
It's cold, but there's also that, obviously the first verse that I mentioned is pretty barren. At the same time, though, we go further with this, when I was three, maybe four, she left us at that video store. Be my rest, be my fantasy. See, here it's back to kind of those vagaries that I was referring to earlier with him. Like, I almost want to see nostalgia in here, but there's also, like holes that I gather.
The whole song sort of culminates for me as a self-recrimination. He ends up blaming himself for somewhat of what he's feeling right now, some of what happened. He feels like maybe the best term, he didn't leave off on the best terms with his mother. And this whole thing culminates with, I should have known better, nothing can be changed. The past is still the past, the bridge to nowhere. I should have wrote a letter explaining what I feel, that empty feeling.
Yeah, that's funny.
The whole way it comes together, he's sort of blaming, but not completely, blaming the death he's feeling, the despair and everything, on himself for not trying to do more.
But I definitely get that, and that's the hole that I see within this, nostalgia. Nostalgia would imply that it's all positive. I think there's a lot of to and fro here.
Well, especially what hammers that home is from the midpoint on, it just has this slow build instrumentally that culminates with a kind of cold ending. And it's, the whole almost second half of the track is mostly instrumental. And it really culminates with that, again, that kind of whole feeling that we got in the first track. It didn't linger in it as long as the last track did, but it definitely still there, that emptiness.
Not wholly instrumental. For instance, there were a lot of little subtle layers, I think, that bring us to that point. And then even so, we still kind of get a final couple of verses tacked onto that. For instance, after, the obvious, which is consistent throughout, this sort of like guitar and banjo duet, we do get like a second verse that adds another one of those like reverb heavy choirs in the background, and then by the time we get to the instrumental, it adds like this electronica element, which is like this little light interlude, just this almost a child's ditty, but still kind of intricate with its whole mesh with the banjo. And then he joins with that on the final verse. So then all of a sudden that continues playing out. So the instrumental is joined with the final verse and the final chorus. Or if you want to see it as perhaps a secondary bridge, don't back down, there is nothing left. The breakers in the bar, no reason to live. I'm a fool in the fetter, rose of Aaron's beard, where you can reach me. I mean, a lot of
this... It just sounds so bleak.
Yeah.
But there is one little line, because that's not how it
That's
ends.
in contrast with the music, of course.
Yeah.
The music sounds so uplifting here.
There is that one little line he does end with, my brother had a daughter, the beauty that she brings, illumination. And the repetition, the background repetition of illumination, even as the heavier strings come in. And if the whole song was kind of building hope, those strings I kind of see as killing it, as truly just bringing the grief to the forefront, as bringing the sadness to the forefront.
I think it was actually very reflective. You're talking about the final outro, when everything is snuffed out. So this is after the instrumental, when finally we get sort of a reflection of the first song. We have another cathedral feel when it's really more of a string chamber instead of a choir. And at first it was sort of a combination of the choir and these violins. Now I really feel more just straight up cellos or uprights. and that's it. That's all you're left with. So it's like, once again, the reflection of tone. All that's left is the whole, and that's what you're left to deal with. So even despite a secondary track that was attempting to deal with sort of different subjects here, so it seems, it still kind of came to the same thing. That strikes me as the manner in which, well, the human mind would often start, like, making connections that bring whatever is forefront, whatever is paramount at that moment to the table.
Well, right. Well, the idea of even on the basis level of depression, even if you find something to be happy about and push it to the back, it'll always come forward if the wound is fresh.
Yeah.
And that's the idea here. From here we go to track 3, All of Me Wants All of You. Right here from the beginning, instead of starting with finger picking like the last 2 tracks had, we have a harder strum here, like a full-fledged guitar strum kind of playing, which, you know, is something slightly different.
It's a major pickup because of that.
Yeah.
It's a major boost to the energy. I mean, granted, we're still not jumping and screaming and dancing around, but it's a big change of events as far as the emotion is concerned for me. It's going from this slightly dour, and I'm using dour as a compliment in this case, slightly dour framework of the first 2 tracks. This one feels almost lively.
See, you know, it's back and forth for me, because it almost strikes me as the same trap that, you know, we felt we were getting into when we went from the first track into the second track, and the second track turned out to be a lot more negative, but yet the music still seemed kind of positive. Here, I would call it, like, seemingly uplifting. I mean, we're back to E minor, so it's still kind of grounded, but the only reason this might sound a little bit lighter as a whole is because it's basically just a 4-chord progression piece. I didn't find the same intricacies here, but there was also a strange shift in subject matter. This struck me more as a breakup on the lyrical front. This obviously is a different kind of loss, but it's still loss, and that's what I see him doing here, because otherwise it would seem rather odd for him to just kind of like shift focus. Well, let's look at this now. But it seemed like the aftermath or the sensation he's left with is almost very, very similar. Shall we beat this or celebrate it? You're not the one to talk things through. And here's a line. You checked your texts while I masturbated. Manalek, I feel so used. I mean, this is achingly personal.
Yeah.
At the same time, it still is over, again, more of a lighthearted, subtly more lighthearted guitar and banjo backdrop. I mean, it's bizarre, because at the same time, when you go from track 1 to track 2 to track 3, I feel like we're constantly getting these only marginally improvements in tone, and I feel like in many ways the lyrics just find new avenues to get darker. And at the end of the day, I think these chord progressions probably turn out a lot more dour than you initially feel them. So it's like, hey, I'm getting a beachside, and then, oh, you know, I don't think my mood has really gone to that after a verse or 2.
Well, and also the construction of that verse specifically, the fact that it's almost comical, the way he candidly uses the word masturbate.
Yeah.
What is funny initially, upon multiple listens, just becomes sad, because the fact that he's so candid about that means he's essentially just doesn't give a shit anymore.
Well, yeah, and
and that's what's really sad, is that he just doesn't care.
This is time to also bring in a little bit of research. You know, as I was just like poking around through some reviews on this, I try not to go too deep into that before we have this discussion, but just a little bit to kind of get my sense of where the world is on the album. Some were almost ravingly positive, because, as I said, he's sort of like the darling of this contemporary alt community. But and they would just kind of love anything that he wrote. But others are a little bit reticent because of lines like this. For instance, the fact that it's so personal, it feels almost too personal for mass release.
Yeah, but you know what?
I'm back and forth with that, because it really all just depends on, well, did you walk away feeling awkward, or did you just empathize at that moment?
Well, yeah.
I'm leaning toward the latter here.
There is something, and the chorus does a great job of kind of putting it in the right point of view for that. It does keep it personal, but it also removes him sort of from the equation, because you can place yourself in his shoes. Speaking of which... Found myself on Spencer's butte, traced your shadow with my shoe. Empty outline changed my view, Now all of me thinks less of you.
That was, just for reference, that's the moment in which I kind of like turned around and it was like, oh, this is just as depressing as the former. I mean, now all of me thinks less of you. There's also that sense of bitterness here that's just tacked on in addition.
Especially when they revisit the chorus. That's one of my favorite parts, because in the second chorus, the call and response, because he repeats the same lines, but in between each lines, he got himself slightly quieter in the background going, all of me wants all of you. That call and response, instantly, you can latch onto it. Instantly.
And I'm glad you pointed that out, because this chorus here is another one of those powerful melodic moments. It comes across again as being somewhat joyous. All of me wants all of you, and he rises up here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 1. Of course, I'm starting out the numbers of the minor scale here, but this is just that like it's very elevating at this moment, and it's enhanced, as John said, by this echo of another vocal track. So you get that melodic line. Saw myself on Spencer's Butte. All of me wants all of you. Landscape changed my point of view. All of me wants all of you. All of this is just, I mean, it's almost kind of this, like, you almost want to rally and sing along at the same time. You feel saddened at the same time.
I was singing along, and it was sad singing along.
Sad, okay, that's exactly where he wants you to be then.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is also it adds impact to the later moments. Like, we get a guitar interlude here. We haven't really had long interludes to this point, but there's a little bit of guitar work here that you can get into and enjoy, but ultimately it's very bittersweet, because even though the guitar moment and this not solo but kind of interlude instrumental feels sweet, it's bittersweet by nature because of the way the song still resolves itself. And I think that's a big impact from the lyrics. I think what you're meant to feel here is not necessarily awkward, but take a moment and go, well, is this the real Sufjan? Was the earlier stuff the real Sufjan? Where are we with what he's actually feeling and what he actually experienced and what he's giving you in the song?
But see, I think it's all a combination of, it's a combination of everything,
yes.
And it's very obvious because, well, how should you deal with grief? You know, there's people, there's certain friends of yours that are going to be like, nah, pick up, move on right away, man. You got let's go for a drink, and there are these people that are almost like too happy, when sometimes you do just want to sit with it for a while, and that's what you feel you need to do. But then there's also people who take that to the extreme, and then it's been like years, and it's like, well, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? Just dwell in grief? That I don't think that's how the person who passed would want you to deal with it that way. I think it's like he's giving you this via the avenue of music, which is always capable of doing everything at once. He's just trying to sort of tack on those layers and very subtly make you feel his transition from mood to mood. But I'm glad you also brought up that instrumental, because that instrumental, when it includes the guitar, is more of a electronic guitar in a style that I heard back in shoegaze when we were doing Yo La Tengo. That very light, but clearly trying to like have an electronic overlayer to everything. That is the style of guitar he introduced here, and that kind of steps away from the folk style. So I see how musically it seems to depart as well. But again, that's just kind of trying to move you through the motions.
Yeah, and this song...
Well, this song culminates with the almost funeral procession type of organ work. That almost... It feels like a death. Maybe not the most grievous of death. Maybe it's a little bit insulated in this case for me. But it comes across as very much, not a dirge, just a major part of a ceremony. You're going to sing a hymn. I'm drawing a lot from Catholicism here, because Matt's got a kind of have a confused face going on right now.
We have hymns in Judaism too?
Yeah.
What are they
not
called
like
again?
Something different. Well, I mean, we have prayers. We have, it's all sorts of different things.
But there's a name, though. I can't think of it.
Well, and I can only draw from my Christianity.
Well,
and
you're
Catholic
drawing from
upbringing
your
and everything like
experience.
that. It's just long accordion, not accordion, long.
It's like a mellotron.
Notes.
It's
Exactly.
kind of like a mellotron. It sort of has that feel. And it's true, the outro here, it takes on a much more warmer touch. Like, I would almost say it's again reflective of the first two tracks, but here it's like we dropped the reverb, and the fact that we did that, almost I'm inclined to kind of read into this. Perhaps it has to do with the fact that this is more of that personal, like, loss of of a loved one in your life, but not to death. So it's almost like the
It's
funny thing is,
right,
I felt like
warmer.
I felt like it was actually stripped of a religious overtone. Granted, you're right; it does have that like church organ. If it were like in a small local church kind of thing, like a
Exactly.
chapel, but it's a chapel as opposed to that grandeur of cathedral. Almost like there was more emphasis in the first two tracks than there is here.
Which is the lack of
This
the
is-
reverberation, which is the lack of the, I don't know, ad nauseum notes going on right there in some of the church processions. It's almost...
It's like a cathedral is the place for death, and this is more for something warmer and worldlier.
maybe,
as love.
Maybe, but more... Still more homey. Still more condensed. It's more hometown kind of a feel. I guess the local chapel is a good example of it, because you would know everybody as you're walking through the door. If it's a local, then the congregation is 1/10 the size of something major in the city. But I know I might be reading a little bit too far into this. It's grieving, but it's grieving without the major just sadness that death can bring about.
Again, I just referenced the fact that it's a loss of a loved one to perhaps falling out, as opposed to a loss of a loved one to death.
Yeah, just segregation from them.
Right. All right, let's go on to track 4, Drawn to the Blood.
Instrumentally, this song does something that it might be one of my favorite moments on the track.
Well, it's thinner to start off.
The music is thinner, but what the guitar does with the vocals, the way he phrases it, gives this kind of, and Steve gave me the perfect words to describe it, an almost fan buffering effect, as if it's a rotating sound. So it's in one ear, then in the other, gives a whirring kind of feel to all of the sound together, which is interesting.
That has to do with the time signatures here, because I mean, I was listening to this. I didn't listen too closely, but at times it sounded as if it was almost in 6/4. But then it's like he adds an extra 2 beats in a certain moment, or an extra 2 chords in a certain moment. So you get this like very steady, like on the beat, just kind of like this hammering out. But then every once in a while, the chord will change in a very, very odd moment. Now, of course, there's regularity within this, but it's over the course of a longer form, such that as Matt said, you can kind of interpret this as a sense of like going around in a circle or buffering irregularly. But there's also moments here on the melodic front that I think are just as powerful as some of the greatest moments that we've had. Let's just read a little bit here. I'm drawn to the blood, the flight of a one-winged dove. How did this happen? The strength of his arm, my lover caught me off guard. How? Head of a rabbit. For my prayer has always been love. What did I do to deserve this? Now, right there, my prayer has always been love, and he holds that out, and it's such a sweet moment. Also, this is a nice follow-up to the previous track, because we were discussing more the love of two people in a non-parental way, and it seems like this is kind of once he devolves to what did I do to deserve this, all of a sudden there's a lot of connectivity here between what we obviously know is the overall theme, that being the passing of his mother, and that's a kind of almost a falling out with God, as if you. Not that necessarily has happened, but a lot of people go through those moments of doubt, especially when something really, really harrowing has happened. Because obviously, even if we aren't spiritual, we all have prayers, or we call them hopes. We all have things that we'd hope would happen. And then we feel a little bit betrayed when things don't quite go that way, especially if we felt we did all the right things. And it seems like this is that answer to both scenarios. Is one a metaphor for the other? It's
a crisis of faith, and you don't have to be religious to have a faith. You have faith in people. You have faith in things, and this is a crisis of faith. This is, whenever you utter the words, what did I do to deserve this? You're saying, I've done everything right, or I think I've done everything in line. Why did this happen? It's a big question to ask, and those questions come from a crisis of faith.
Why do bad things happen to good people?
And also because it tends to be somewhat gender neutral overall. You don't know if he's actually talking from his point of view. You don't know who he may in fact be talking about. You don't know if it actually is a parent or a lover or something like that.
No, it's pretty clear here. My lover caught me off guard. I mean, I'm pretty sure we're...
The strength of his arm? I mean...
Yeah, I don't know.
It could have been both. It could have been anything.
Still positive gender neutrality.
With blood on my sleeve? I mean, he's talking about abuse, an abusive thing going on here. There's obvious pain coming from this love, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional. There's an obvious pain coming from it. It's another aspect of grief, another way he's experienced grief over the years. And this, another side of the coin, when you have something in here, the walking guitar, that's great and everything like that, but the pause between the first and second part of the song, you get 2 verses and the chorus, and then you have that symphonic shaping in between. His outro is being previewed here, and this is a little bit different, and I love the song for it. That shaping, that soundscape that he does in between everything is just really gorgeous, but it's so depressingly gorgeous for me. I love it.
Well, because this time it lasts over a much longer stretch. It comprises almost the last half of this track, and the entire all the verse work is just snuffed out. First of all, we get several choruses here. How did this happen? How, head of a rabbit? How, God of Elijah? And it should probably be mentioned that at least in Christian terms, Elijah is come to be seen as the one who comes at the end. As of Judgment Day, Elijah will be there. So, to specifically reference the God of Elijah, it kind of makes me feel as if he's at his wit's end here, as his own personal judgment day, as it were. And then, finally, how hard of a dragon. And it's like all these stand-ins amidst that. Head of a rabbit, heart of a dragon is stand-in for God of Elijah. It's like, I feel the falling out here as well. He's just putting in a figure in the place of who he's praying to. And then finally, for my prayer has always been love. What did I do to deserve this now? How did this happen? And then just it cuts out, and for the last half, we're left with this vacant, cold. It goes to B flat minor, then we step up this whole step to C minor, and then down to E flat minor, then F minor, and then we kind of continue this cycle over and over again. And there's no voice leading here. It's just hopping around the keyboard, or as we'll refer to as the mellotron, or however you want to see it. But it has this long decay, each chord just lingers with you for a very long stride. And since there's no other instruments here, it comes across as a very empty progression. And I don't mean that in the sense as if it has no emotional value. It's empty. It's vacant. It's cold. Thus, it has more emotional value by it not being accompanied by other instrumentation or by other harmonies. Just the cold triads poking around in sort of this aimless cycle. And then there's only one moment at the tail end here where it seems to have a slight pick-me-up, and this is like one of the last chords when it modulates to B-flat major. And at that moment, all of a sudden, we're a little bit more relaxed, as if that's the only turn you can make without having the true existential crisis that he'd been building to, it seems.
It comes across almost as if it was a melody, for me, that was stripped down. Instead of being the full piece, it was a single note, and where everything else would have built up to the next note you heard. Instead, he just draws out that single note, and then when the next one comes in, he just draws out that single note.
There's no melody. You hear the melody just as the chords themselves. That's the melody.
Yeah, it's almost whitewashing something else with a single note on top of it. It comes. Yeah. It's extremely beautiful.
But it's also another one of those moments that's lacking reverb. It has kind of that similar warmth that the outro of the previous track did.
Well, the idea of it whitewashing is actually a great segue into our next track, Eugene, because track 5 is a warmer emotional feeling, and this whitewashing instrumental at the end kind of gives way to this. Eugene starts off and feels very nostalgic and sweet and darling, There's more finger picking in this track. It's not a hard strum anymore. We're back to the kind of folk, kind of banjo playing. And, this one, at least initially, kind of makes you smile. It feels more darling, more sweet.
It comes across as very, very much a retrospective view on all the innocuous events you went through in life, all the little things that, at the time, meant nothing. They didn't really shape your life one way or the other, but it's those things that you remember about your life when you're reflecting upon your grief.
Yeah, that's a good way to see it. And also the medium is apt too, because it's this very traditional folk style, even more a little bit 60s than anything else. It really stepped back in time, even I would say pre Simon and Garfunkel. But I mean, it's still intricate in its way, but it wasn't as impactful, perhaps, for that overall usage. But I see why he used it, because all the lyrics here, it's true, it's very benign. There's not a lot of impact there. This is almost the true nostalgia that I feel like I was expecting from track 2, but didn't get, because I realized that was kind of like drenched in bitterness. But here we really do get the nostalgia, and it's not entirely clear how it's related, except to sort of bring you back in time when things were innocent and easier.
Yeah, it's just supposed to kind of make you feel like this is pre-grief, this is pre-problem, this is how he felt when nothing was really wrong, like just acknowledging the life moments, the day-to-day.
And because of its numbness, because of the almost numbness in his vocal work, the kind of numbness that's actually present in the guitar, because the guitar really is doing nothing. The guitar banjo combination of what's going on, it's not really doing anything. The words are just telling very, like Steve said, benign's even a better word, very benign events. The whole thing comes across as almost rose-colored glasses to some extent.
Right,
as
but
sort
of course,
looking back, and you're not seeing any of the big important events because they have emotional value to them that you can't deal with right now. It's more just a little events that you just remember and you can smirk about.
Right, but of course it does tie in terms of the refrain that appears at the end of every single verse. I just wanted to be near you. He always brings it back, and he really brings it back at the tail end here. The second to last verse, still I pray to what I cannot see, again a reference to the previous track. In the sprinkler I mark the evidence known from the start, from the bed near your death and all the machines that made a mess. Far away the falcon flew, and again, now I want to be near you. So all of a sudden here, it's like he broke that rose-colored glasses that John mentioned. He broke the mist, and now all of a sudden he's here in the present, and it's much colder reality. I love that reference and all the machines that made a mess, because I have almost no doubt that's a reference to cancer treatment attempts.
Absolutely.
Well, he really drives the point home for me in the final verse. What's left is only bittersweet. For the rest of my life, admitting the best is behind me. Now I'm drunk and afraid, wishing the world would go away. What's the point of singing songs if they're never even hear you?
Yeah, that he really drives it home at the tail end there.
Well, he's essentially saying, why should I keep writing music if she can't hear it anymore?
And
this is true despair right now.
This is a tactic that he's done in his previous work. I really enjoy it. It's a kind of like breaking the fourth wall amidst it. He'll whatever story he's telling at that moment, all of a sudden he just kind of like breaks first from his story back to reality, and then finally out of not even in reality, but out of the song. Now all of a sudden, it's, well, why even continue? I love that humility that he professes, knowing that he's obviously an artist, and his career is to write music, write albums, and this, because it's incredibly personal work, you're bound to have moments of like, well, how true am I being? And sometimes the truest you can be is when you take yourself out of the barrier between you and the audience, and that is the art itself. Why not just speak from the heart?
Right, and truly, that's what he's doing here. He's giving you this completely honest, unchanged moment with Sufjan, the guy. Not even the musician, the artist, the personality, the guy. This is how he feels.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, and I will want to point out this major flaw, the thing he's going for, he achieves greatly, which is numbness, but it's really numb for me. Just the level that he really hits before the ending of this song made me wander a little bit. Made me just deviate a little bit the first time I heard this song.
Well, you're raising a good point as far as this track is concerned, because I think this is another one of those times where it depends on how you're approaching this album. Again, some people are just going to like swoon over whatever he does, and then other people are going to come at this with really, really skeptical mindset that it's just, it's generic folk. It's if you're not peering at the theme and you're not peering at his lyrics and his gorgeous melodies, then you're just left with this like barren landscape. And you can kind of gloss over that. And certainly, as far as this album is concerned, this track particularly could probably be called a musical filler track. You can gloss over it because there's not that much to stand out in the way of music. As I said, it's just like a childish ditty walking us through all of these motions. It really doesn't change very much over the course of it. It's really my favorite line is just that final refrain, now I want to be near you. But I think that in context of the album, on a second listen, a third listen, I really came to appreciate how this track bridges together some of the earlier concepts and some of the later concepts, specifically the next track here, because it's true that as a prequel, it pales in comparison by what the 4th of July does. This track 6, 4th of July, and I'm going to say right out front that this is, I think, the emptiest and the thinnest, and he seems to keep topping himself, ironically enough, in this regard, track of the lot. This is the death. This is the event recited very face value.
And it's almost jarring, almost, in context of the album, because we're not getting a plucked or strummed instrument, we're getting a piano. It's instantly a different sound we're hearing. And
I still think it made an appearance earlier.
It's never been the focus until this moment.
And having
never
it
been
as
the only thing.
As a focus, with a little bit of just soundscaping around the edges to flush it out, it was obvious. It was almost obvious from the inception, and became very obvious very quickly, that this was going to be a focal point of the theme of the album. And it does a beautiful job of doing that. By just having something replacing the strummed instruments and keeping it within the same family, because the piano's not too far out. But just the fact that
it's not far out at all. It's a stringed instrument. Well, it's a hammered stringed instrument.
But there you go, hammered. And by having it hammered, it ends a different emotional value right away. It adds a finality to it that just perfectly frames what this song goes into.
So there's an emotion on the emotional scale also. There's no hiding it at this point. There's no illusion. Within the first phrase, there's a dark tone that really conveys this longing, this almost desperate longing over this death.
And do this by repeating 3 notes. On the piano, it's just this A, repeated several times, then we go to a G sharp, go down to F sharp. Lots of octave work, it seems, here. Just plain octaves. I really didn't even detect to bother with chords here. He wants it that thin. So let's lose the farthest interval possible. And then the verse itself, when it enters, almost feels like an incomplete phrase. The evil it spread like a fever ahead. It was night when you died, my firefly. What could I have said to raise you from the dead? Oh, could I be the sky on the 4th of July? And each and every time he goes back to this, it almost feels like that phrase is just being cut short because of this round that the piano is caught in. It really is beautiful, though. I mean, it's
powerful. It's so powerful. And the thing is that, as we kind of called it, a death hum, that sound that happens after that verse is just so deep and powerful. It's obvious that note is representing this darkness.
It's like a cello. We're pretty sure it's within that similar family because it has a reverberation you associate with strings, but still, because of the way it is fooled around with, it's not 100% identifiable, which adds a level to the mystique to it.
Yeah, of course. It's like a long drawn upright bass tone that's again applied through several filters, and of course the same level of reverb that he's applied throughout this album so far. But that cyclical nature of the verse always comes down to the same exact thing. He has that incomplete phrase because of the cycle of the piano, which actually here goes more from like 6, 4, 5, 2, 1, and repeats 1, 1, 1 over and over and over, and just stays there. Assuming that, of course, we're in F sharp minor, which I believe we are. But again, it kind of like you have so little context here. At times, it just seems like tones. You really don't get this like center of home anywhere, and then it's enhanced by that that drone, which comes in like clockwork at the end of every single verse, or if I'm correct, every single phrase. Yep. It was night when you died, my firefly. Broom. We enter in with that. Or could I be the sky on the 4th of July? Broom. We enter in again. It's just this low hum that is incidentally in F sharp, so that kind of also anchors in this F sharp minor feel. But it's like we're doing so little with the scale here.
It's like,
and I love it.
It's like before you can even reel back from the impact of the last time you've heard that note, as you're coming forward, it hits you again. It's like being belted in the face almost.
But the vocals are just the opposite. They're so almost backpedaling from the emotions themselves. I mean, it's still a point where he doesn't want to deal with it.
There's fear. There's fear in this vocal work. There's definitely this the backpedaling, I think, is a result of this fear. He doesn't want to acknowledge it, but it's just obvious.
And, he really decides also to hit it home with one of the most impactful lines in the entire album. The hospital asks, should the body be cast before I say goodbye, my star in the sky? Such a funny thought to wrap you in a cloth. Do you find it all right, my dragonfly?
That's my favorite line.
Well,
because also it's really playing off the notion that, well, your mother wrapped you in cloth when you were just a little child, and now all of a sudden you have to wrap them in cloth, and it's one time only, and it is a funny thought in the most macabre sense.
Yeah.
It really is.
This song is just macabre from start to finish. It's very hard to listen to. I could not keep my eyes dry every time I listen to it. Thinking about it just upsets me. It's just so powerful.
There were 2 songs in this album that made me feel that way, and it came from the first track, again, for the emotional center that I think he established between him and his mother, and then here
This is the moment. You're in the hospital room with him.
Yeah, that's the way you feel.
You feel like you're standing next to him as when the lines John read. I felt like I was standing next to Sufjan as he's looking at his mother with her eyes closed, mulling this over. Like, my arm is around him. Like, I'm in that moment. It really does.
See, it's funny because I felt the same thing in the first track, despite the fact that perhaps the music, and this is probably the only, strange disparity we're going to have in this album, it's just like, well, where is your emotional center within this overall album? You could just like the album as a whole and then leave it at that, but I like to be particular here, and I see this kind of, duality between the first track and the 6th track, but it comes down to specific lines and specific melodic tools. Like in the first track, it all came down to that, I long to be near you. I forgive your mother, I can hear you, and I long to be near you, but every road leads to an end. Yes, every road leads to an end. It's rich foreshadowing that he includes in that first track, and then all of a sudden here, it's really the existential matter of it all. We're all going to die. And that's the final refrain in this track. It all concludes with just him repeating over and over and over, we're all going to die. We're all going to die. He tries to throw in some beauty to it. He gets into a much richer falsetto. He takes the harmonies and then but how much beauty can you add?
Depressing. That's the most depressing notion when you're so close to death, is to think about, realistically, someday you will be dead. That's it. That's just a fact of life. And it's like, how that old saying, there are only 2 definites in this world, death and taxes.
Yep.
It's that idea that no matter what you do in this life, no matter how hard you try, you cannot avoid dying.
Right. And that's really only brings me back to that disparity. Is just like, well, if there's going to be an emotional center here, I feel like it comes down to the fact that this track made me focus more, I think, on the death than I did the emotional connection. I think it came so close to the existential reality of it all that my reaction was very, very unique from the first track to this track. It seems like a strange comparison because, again, at a glance, people might throw in the first track with the bunch, but I feel like it set a standard for this album because of those moments and because of the connection. So that actually did make me tear up. It made me almost choke up. This track, kind of found myself just staring. Don't get me wrong, it's profound in its way, but that's, I think, what a more reality-driven track will do to you.
This also leads us to the next track, The Only Thing. And in this case, here's my emotional center when it comes to grief. This track, this right here, really becomes a crux of the album for me because, well, track 1 did its thing, and Steve's right. It did set up a great way of foreshadowing the tragedy we were coming to get. And if 4th of July is the death of the character...
It's the climax of the album,
the climax.
For sure.
The only thing is that initial gut reaction, and it comes across so guttural for me. I can't get away from it. It becomes the real soul, because for all of the talking about the past and reflecting upon it, for all the ways that grief is interacting with Stevens here... This is that first reaction. This is that instance that death happens and how you take it when it finally hits in. And that is some of the most powerful emotions anybody will ever feel. I remember when I found out my grandfather died, he passed away not too long ago. I am amazingly related to this song itself.
Well, because it doesn't pull any punches, this song. From the minute it starts, it's an internalized struggle, and it's the obvious dealing with someone just died that you care about. Why even live? That terrifying struggle with suicide after you've lost someone who means more to you than you feel life itself.
Right, so you have 3 different roads in which you could probably reach a very, very emotional place. One being the first track for the foreshadowing, and then the emotional connection, then being the 6th track for the death itself, and this finally being the reaction. It didn't get me as much, and that maybe only had to do with the music itself. I didn't find the same melodic heights in this. First of all, we're at a very, very light framework again. Of course, it's about suicide, but it's E-flat major, and the only thing odd I found that it almost never goes home. It almost never returns to E-flat major. It's like we're clearly there, but we never settle there. It always kind of is just like cycling around from chord to chord to chord, and we never just like sit in a place, perhaps because of like the erratic nature involved with a fringe suicidal mind.
I like that, and I like that coupled with the plucky nature of the banjo going on here.
It's very fast, also. A lot of
and that's why I really feel like it does capture this feeling, because it's adrenaline. It's muted adrenaline because there's still a lot of sadness on top of this, but it's that moment when the adrenaline is hitting your eyes and things are becoming clear. At least clear in your grief-addled mind as it can be, but it's an emotional level that really does have a lot of energy associated with it.
I think it's also so personal because anyone who's struggled with it, and as someone who has myself, this is not about doing it. This is about thinking about doing it. And that's where the most realistic struggle is, because someone who's actually done it has a whole other series of issues. But someone who's more even people have thought about it, because it's normal at some point for a lot of people to at least let your mind wander there once.
I would flat out say it's a little bit abnormal if it never even crossed your mind. How can you have a firm grasp of what death really means if you haven't wondered what it's like to do it, and especially of one's own accord? I mean, he also includes some lines in here which bring more a clarity that didn't exist earlier on the album, where there was vagaries before. Now all of a sudden we have the only reason why I continue at all. Faith in reason, I wasted my life playing dumb. Signs and wonders, sea lion caves in the dark, blind faith, God's grace, nothing else left to impart. This is that moment we'd been hinting to this up to this point. You get a sense that he's lost his faith a little bit, or there's some doubt. And this, he's just right up front with it.
He's hopeless. He's absolutely hopeless, and he doesn't know how to handle it.
I mean,
the closer and closer you get to that moment of being on the fringe of doing something is probably when you're going to be more blunt.
He's just pleading at this point. Should I tear my eyes out now? Everything I see returns to you somehow.
Yeah.
Should I tear my heart out now? Everything I feel returns to you somehow. That
sums up grief.
There you go.
People who can't escape the 5 stages.
But it's
can't
right
get to the 5th.
But it's just so blatant, just so much he's even thinking about how he's going to do it. The only thing that keeps me from cutting my arm, crosshatch, warm bath, holiday inn after dark, signs and wonders, water stain writing the wall, Daniel's message, blood in the moon on us all. I mean, that he's thought about it.
Yeah.
Not just thought about, but planning, figuring it out.
That's
dark.
He listed locations, ways to leave the note, all of these things that are very real and very terrifying.
That was right up front. Drive the car, half-light, jackknife into the canyon at night. He's this is definitely this is classic rumination right here.
Yeah.
And I really do love his falsetto right there at, should I tear my eyes out now, or should I tear my arms out now? Absolutely beautiful. And there are moments throughout this, I think, that do step it up a little bit. Even though I'm not feeling the groove itself, I do like the chordal motion, and I do like the cello or upright, whichever it is, stepping in with the guitar also. And then the chorus layers on, so we do get these little layers as the thing goes forward. So it's not really that vapid of a track, but perhaps the only reason why it is so thin and steady is because you're dealing with rumination.
And it's a lyrically focused song. You're supposed to hear the words that he's saying because that's where the story and the real emotion is.
Right, so you thin everything out and then his voice is highlighted.
And musically, it does provide a pretty good counterpoint to 4th of July. The combination of the two will forever be linked in my mind. I will not be able to hear one without the other.
For some reason, I would really include Eugene. I came to really appreciate Eugene going in.
It's a bookended middle piece. I think it truly is a second act.
Right.
Truly, truly is. From here we go to track 8, Carrie and Lowell, the title track. We've got a much faster pace here, faster for this album at least. The finger picking is at double speed almost.
This time we're steady like on 16th notes.
And it's really kind of giving you an erratic feeling in the fact that you're trying to kind of like, you're hunting, you're searching, you're trying to, it's this constant quest to figure out how to handle this moment.
And also, by contrast, this was far more intricate than the previous track.
Yes.
I mean, this included overlapping falsettos, which harmonize in certain places, and also these really astute breaks in the music. I think that's another thing I was really lacking in the previous track, because we didn't really have that breather, which, again, I'm sure matches the mindset. But here we do have very important breathers. Right after the verses, we have this, season of hope after the flood, Valentine spurn my sorrow, head on the floorboards covered in blood, drunk as a horsefly, climb on the mattress pad, twist my arm. And suddenly after that,
it's a pause that gives way to distortion.
It's like a distorted synth sound that gives way to a pause. It gurgles, and then all of a sudden we just shoop to silence, and then we just pick up again the second verse like nothing ever happened.
And as the song progresses, after every verse, that distortion gets longer and longer, accenting and giving a very fine focus on those pauses, these dark moments, which we're getting so much of in this record. It adds an ominousness. Ominousness?
I think that's right.
An ominence, something like that. It makes this track more ominous than any tracks that came before it. Much more ominous, this track.
Yes, that.
Seriously, though, it just really makes me... It returns me to a bit of 4th of July, where you get this moment of, there's that darkness here, that really creeping death that's there. It's not just in the background. It's bleeding through.
Really creeping death.
Yes, creeping death.
Really creeping death.
Really creeping death.
But the speed...
That's the sequel to the Metallica song Creeping Death.
Really death. This album is really death.
It really is.
It's much death.
The speed here, though, keeps it from being that, total downer that the 4th of July is. That total just heartbreak, that fourth thing.
It fluctuates.
This, if you want to see as Act 2 starting, this is dealing a little bit better. But also having those relapses. That rumbling is definitely harkening back to the cello work that was in 4th of July. That sort of sweeping death noise that was kept coming in and out. But it's still a little bit more, I want to say, upbeat, just because of the energy that's involved here.
Of course.
It's more of a blending of track 6 and 7 together, but it's trying to find an emotional center here, and it doesn't quite do that, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
I really am.
It depends on really what you want to take. Again, if suicide's your bag, not that it should be, but hell, I mean, if that's just what is going to make you more emotional at the end than the previous track is going to do it. This, I think, has its place. It definitely has more on the musical front. Frankly, I think I came to an early realization on this album that I think I enjoy more when he gets thinner. The thinner, the better on this. It clearly enhances his point better than the layers do.
Something I've noticed also that I don't really think is a metaphor, more as just maybe it was important in their lives, but on several occasions, it happens on this track as well as in other tracks, he refers to the deceased or a character or makes some kind of relationship to horses. He mentions mares earlier. Dead horse comes up several times in this track. So I don't know if horses were important in his life with his mother or if it's just an easy metaphor for him to go to. But I think it's interesting that he does keep bringing it up.
Actually, well, there may very well be a reason for that, and that's obviously the concept that, a horse was that, you live with it. It was like the closest thing you'd have to. It was not just a pet, but it was your companion, and
That's
it was
true.
your working, did everything.
Your partner
in crime unseen and whatever. But
literally,
but then
it
there's that
carries
moment.
you.
But then there's that moment when all of a sudden horse is sick, and obviously in the old days, what do? Shoot it.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that's not entirely the same, but it's almost a similarity to it, especially with when you think about cancer and the long time in the making of it. It's
well,
almost
what did
like
people say when
the way you need to kind of just psychologically edit it out because it wasn't shocking to you. It was almost the decision. It was conscious.
Well, also that thing that people always say when there's cancer involved in any kind of death, it's, well, at least they're not suffering anymore.
Yeah,
this idea that they're at least they're not in pain,
right?
Because you don't want them to be in pain, and I think that leads to also what you were saying before. It's just an interesting thing.
People deal with cancer a lot differently because of very often, the very, very long times in the making.
Well, I mean, and it doesn't always end in tragedy, but a lot of the time it does. I do.
True.
I actually personally know cancer survivors. We've had guests who were, and it's never easy to talk about. I've never bring
not to be negative, but sometimes it happens after 20 years.
Yeah,
which is still like, all right, hell, if you have 20 years ahead of humanity, it seems like a good thing. We all never know what it's like to have like a date. You know, when they say rough, and then it's not always correct, but it's true. It's death can like steal you at any point, but certainly whenever you start like. That's why he made that reference earlier about how the machines made a mess. It's almost as if it kind of like robbed it of the natural cycle, which is not that that's like a claim that he has or a claim that I'm making or anything, but like it feels like there's maybe some like bitterness there over the time frame in which he was left to deal with this. So
I think from here it's a good time to go on to our next track, track 9. John, My Beloved. So,
okay, wait. First, before we get into anything else, John, My Beloved, most unique little thing going on here that was identifiable for me, but I did not know what it was, and Matt saw it before even I did, and the vocal doubling is gone. The single voice line.
This is the most... I frame this as the first time we're actually getting Sufjan the person, not Sufjan the artist, the personality of the character. None of that. This is Sufjan the person. It's just one voice, a tapping rhythm, no guitar at all. At least in the beginning, it's just this tapping rhythm, whether it's being produced by a keyboard or something, but it's literally just almost like a foot tapping and just a solo voice.
Like this was to my point earlier about I think he's at his best when he gets thinner, and I think this yet again is one of the thinnest on the album, in line with 4th of July. It's just a march in 3/4. You're right, just one vocal track, one synth layer, and that's pretty much it. And then what we're left with vocally is clearly like this barren prayer, a wit's end kind of prayer. A
little bit of anger, a lot of bit of grief. It's the sort of wit's end is one way to put it, but it's also it's almost demanding, and that's what I really like about it. It is on the cusp of saying "you owe me."
It's exhaustion, too. I feel like at this point in this track, he's kind of just tired. Tired of the emotional roller coaster, tired of the relapses, tired of the pain, just tired. And that exhaustion comes through, and I think the way he sings the lyrics and the actual lyrics themselves.
Well, obviously, there's tiredness. We experience tiredness also because we go through this album, and every song vaguely covers the same subject. So, it's really an exercise in how many different directions, how many ways can you deal with death, how many ways can you project death in art. And so the order is kind of interesting because we already had our Close to Suicide track, and then here, and we already had our Crises of Faith, and then here, all of a sudden, we have a return to prayer. But the only reason I mentioned that it's like at its wit's end is because there are certain lines here. Every verse closes, or rather, every chorus closes off with "There's only a shadow of me. In a manner of speaking, I'm dead." Yeah. So, in a sense, it's like this really is a pick-me-up. It's true it's at his wit's end, but John made a point earlier about how this is almost like this kind of return to attempt to at least make something out of it. Like, well, if there was going to be an uphill slope to the horrible parabola that is this grief struggle, then this perhaps is the first little climb, is a return to faith, a return to looking for something, a void to fill. He still admits he's at the end of his game here. There's only a shadow of me, in a manner of speaking, I'm dead. But there's a clear desire to move on from this. Can we contend peacefully before my history ends? Even a direct call out, Jesus, I need you, be near me, come shield me from fossils that fall on my head. I mean...
And I love that line, from fossils that fall on my head, from the historical things that are just concrete in his life, that have hit him and are now just avalanching on top of him. I love that idea. It's a very unique way of putting
the idea
how history hits you.
Sadness cascades. You know, it makes associations. Neurons cross paths with others, and then all of a sudden you're wrapping in all of the things that have ever made you sad, be them separate as they may. All of a sudden, it's just one big heap of keeping you down.
I've also, this song highlights something that I've seen as we talk about him coming back to faith almost more times than I can count. I've seen people who've lost their parents especially dive deeper into a faith that they had distanced themselves from. I have family members who dove deeper into Judaism, went from being conservative, to extremely orthodox, and that's such a hard flip.
Well, it's like this sense that, when you're young, you're bound to stray a little bit. You peer into other things. You don't want to stay too rigid with, follow completely in your parents' footsteps. But there's always a cyclical nature to everything. It's like, well, if they were religious, if they imparted anything unto you, you tend to want to come back to that at the end, or at least in their aftermath, in their wake, or perhaps more toward the end of your life. You ponder the things that were once taught to you if you never lived by them perfectly.
Well, I think it's also more to what John's saying, too. You almost want to ignore, in the face of facts, this mysticism that exists, this faith, because everything has a purpose or a direction. You're not just greeted with cold, hard facts that have an end and are incomplete. You can dive into that faith and just get swallowed whole by that, and I think it's search in it.
Well, because it pretends to give answers, then in the wake of death specifically, it has its greatest appeal, because that's your only recourse.
Yeah.
I've said this many times whenever we deal with this subject matter on the podcast, specifically in terms of religion, there are no atheists in foxholes. It's like, well, if anything's going to get you out of this, certainly random chance is not really that much to go off of in that particular environment. So you might as well to go to something bigger.
Well, it sort of culminates with the whole idea. Stevens wants somebody with him because humanity is a group of social creatures. That's what we are. It's inherent to our nature. Yeah, some people want to be alone. Some people prefer being alone. I like my alone time a lot, and that's not a joke. Nobody wants to die alone.
Yeah.
So even if you are, in fact, the only person in the middle of a desert dying of thirst or what have you, if you still have a deity to look to in that respect,
you're not alone.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And it's scary. I mean, death is inherently scary, but just the fear of the unknown, having someone or something you can latch onto that represents an understanding of what you don't understand, is extremely powerful. And that's what this plead really is. There's anger, because there's always anger and grief in this plea. There's exasperation, because you get tired. Fear and sadness is very tiring, especially when you have to deal with it over a long period of time. But there's also just a need for someone to hold your hand.
Yeah. Because
there is an acknowledgement of the fact that, well, he realizes with the death of this loved one that he too will die. And it's hard. Nobody, especially when they're young, thinks they're ever going to die. Nobody does. Until they're greeted with the prospect of, yes, you are mortal. Whether it's through an illness that they have growing up, or receiving later on in life, or through the loss of a loved one. That's when a lot of times people just go, I'm mortal too.
Yep. Yeah, it's easy to think you're invincible when you're in high school, but when you lose somebody of age in high school too, or college, that really puts it in perspective. You go, oh, wait.
Or even a grandparent.
Right,
yeah,
sure.
A lot of times, or a parent, or something like that. You can just say, yes, they had a great life. We said this earlier. Yes, at least they're no longer in pain. But then you have to realize, well, they were in a lot of pain, and now they're just not here anymore. This is that point where you realize, oh, wait, I won't be here no more.
We're all gonna die. He made a song out of it. I might remix that.
And in 4th of July, we're all gonna die. It's less him saying it. It's more like he is having his mother say it, or the loss of the loved one, whichever loved one he's choosing to represent there, saying one day we will die.
Well, certainly on the
Here,
subject...
he's realized it.
Yeah. And certainly on the subject of religion, the next track seems to sort of take the next step up in this sort of struggle back to something. No shade in the shadow of the cross. This is more like the concept that, well, you know, there's no spot that God can't find you if you were at your wit's end. Well, that's clearly going to help you out somehow. I mean, you know, even if you're in a confessional booth, someone will hear you. If you contact a priest, someone will hear you. There's a little bit of hope there for sure. And it also sort of, I hear that in the beginning, in the opening verse. Now I fell into your arms, my only lover, give out to give in. I search for the counsel I lost. That's flat out, just, you know, pleading to something, to someone higher. Drag me to hell in the valley of the damned. Like my mother, give wings to a stone. It's only the shadow of the cross. I mean, there's distinct hope here, and there's more beauty in this. I was initially like a little bit more, you know, on the musical front, it was kind of samey, but it was also a little more old-fashioned. It struck me as this, like, medieval sound structure to it, if you were going to go in the direction. I mean, all of this is in a sense of folk, but this is more toward like a medieval Renaissance feel in certain little phrases of the guitar. But melodically, specifically, certain moments that he holds, I slept on my back in the shade of the meadow lark, and he holds that out. Like a champion get drowned to get laid, I take one more hit when you depart. And he does the same thing again. I'll drive that stake through the center of my heart, holds that out. And then finally, the final line, there's blood on that blade, fuck me, I'm falling apart.
My favorite line on the whole album, because he does that breaking the fourth wall thing that Steve says, but the way he sings this, it's almost like that part, fuck me, I'm falling apart, is not even supposed to be there. He's literally singing a line within the theme work of this song, and then just can't take it as the person singing about the loss. In that moment, fuck me, I'm falling apart. That has so much weight to it, it redeemed the song for me. I still felt musically it did sound a little samey, but when you get to that moment, after going through this whole song, hearing these lyrics and creating this structure, and him saying that line, I'm like, oh, that's right. He's still a person.
It's another one of his breaking the fourth wall moments. He pulls himself out of the track to just say that the song is falling apart. Can I continue?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like there was hope here, and then all of a sudden...
Nope.
I mean, there's always that moment where you're dragged back down.
But that moment when he's breaking the fourth wall is something that is really the only standoutish part for me. The rest of it was just extremely similar, extremely almost rehashed. I mean, the music is not really doing it for me on this song.
It's
very,
true.
very, very specifically, it's not doing it.
It comes down to that one line for me, and I think it's a lot of these songs. Sometimes it's all wrapped up in a phrase, all wrapped up in a certain melodic phrase, where other parts might not give you the same impact. But it is a very subtle territory you're dealing with, especially with respect to folk, because its whole premise is based on simplicity and dealing with very specific subjects. And he has done pretty damn well with this on this album, as far as I'm concerned, such that I guess a little hole here toward the end where I'm just like, yeah, okay, we've kind of had this so far, and yet still I managed to get melodic lines that reach and stand out. I don't think there's been a track that didn't at least have that one melodic stroke that I think had its dose of brilliance.
Well, I think if you're going to be samey, do it in the second to last track, because, you know, at that point at least, you've been far enough from...
Yeah, you're sold. Now you just provide a great closer and you're out.
Yeah. Speaking of great closers, we move on to track 11, the final track on this album, Blue Bucket of Gold. And, I mean, there are no happy endings with this, and that's really what this song is here to convey, is even though he may find some closure, the reality is when dealing with death, there is no flat-out happy ending. It's what you make of it and how you manage it.
There were two parts for this song for me, though. The vocal part, the lyric-driven part, struck me very similarly to the previous track, as in I really wasn't getting too much of it. But between many of his vocal
It had the one line
phrases,
again, though. It has, in this case, it's that raise your right hand, holds that out very beautifully. And then, second after that, or raise your red flag. When he repeats that second line, he holds that just a I mean, it's gorgeous. Each and every time he returns to that refrain, you know, when I want you in my life.
But except for that, there was a lot surrounding it that was just kind of, okay, we're getting it again. But the main feature of this song, which drove me to it as saying it was a great piece, was the interludes and the spatial shaping he does between parts. And for the actual outro, for the actual finale of the song, his shaping, when he really wants to do something that's just sound, he does a beautiful job with it.
It's like a synth warbling, and then over that the vocals step in with more of like this ooh work. But it was more about the one line to me than that intro, because I feel like we've gotten that stuff before. But also we didn't even mention the framework of this track, which is built on those piano chords. Just the slow, like, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, very steady, unchanging, unwavering. We've heard the piano as a tool here before, and sure, it's the predictable outro use, I guess, but it's still very appropriate, and I didn't stop feeling him at any point.
Well, this song also, in its structure, it really gives way to a lost and wandering feeling, as if he's kind of just drifting away. He doesn't know where to go. And the whole outro instrumental, solidifies that. Steve makes a really good point that when the song goes into this instrumental second half, it gets more distorted, more floating, bleak, slow. But the thing that's really important is there are bits and sounds and soundscapes that have featured in other places of this album, and it really gives you a focus of, no matter what you do and how you handle it, it will always come back to these several things. These different things are part of death and how you deal with it.
Right. The layers of the outro all kind of comprise, they at various times in the album, they've comprised various different aspects. You know, the death tone, as we've put it, is like that moment just creeping in all of a sudden. You know, here you are going about your business, and then suddenly you're just like, I could die tomorrow. You know, who knows? That could happen. And it's just like this thought of death that we all kind of walk through our daily lives with. We try not to let it consume us, but it just steps in, sometimes at very unwanted moments. And he captured that with a single tone earlier in the album. He's also done similar things with this sort of choir that represents a religious element. So as people perceive like the 5 stages of grief, you know, obviously ending as we would have it with acceptance, I don't know if that's necessarily it here. I don't think you really live with acceptance. That's not often how it turns out. Instead, you live with a combination of all of those things at once, and that's the person that you become. Hence, why not combine all of those instruments that defined each and every element and then layer them together? Very, very expert, in my opinion.
And the song is not a finale. It's not a period on this statement. It just trails off. That ending of just fading out, of bringing the different elements in and showing them as they kind of just soften and sort of depress themselves, is so immensely important for this album. It's so perfect for an ending because there is no death. I mean, it doesn't summate with his actual death. It doesn't summate with the main character, you know, meeting his end. It's the main character moving on. He's never going to be free of death. Of the death he's experienced in other people, of the death of other relationships, of the grief that brings. It touches you. It changes you. But because of this, it's not done and you're done. It's fade out. It's always going to color your eyes from now on. And
yeah,
that's beautiful. That's so perfect for how this album went.
Also important to say about this fade out that I think reflects that, there's a lot of fade outs, 20 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, it kind of just fades. This fades out slowly over a minute to a minute and 15
it takes
seconds.
Different elements and just drops them one at a time.
As if he's walking off into the distance slowly, dragging his feet, kind of just carrying this burden still. And it really is, it really does paint a very specific picture of Sufjan Stevens or this lead character or both in this album. I guess I'll get started with our wrap up here.
Yeah, I'm not going first.
So, I mean, there's this might be the most powerfully emotional album we've reviewed since The Paper Chase. Just in the sense that this is not a happy record at all. There are moments of joy. There are moments that you see the love that he has for his mother in a very bright light. But a lot of it is very dark and very depressing because this was hard for him, and as well it should be. We say in the past that sometimes when you over-personalize an album, it can take away from it. But I don't think it does here. I think that this album really, from start to finish, is a very personal story, framed in a way that anyone can relate to. And when dealing with an emotional work, that is important. That's very important when dealing with an emotional work. That said, however, going into Sufjan Stevens expecting what Steve had mentioned and not getting it at all was a little disappointing in the fact that I expected something else. However, what we got was still incredibly powerful and incredibly intricate because he took something that could be very stripped down and boring and very, here's how I feel, but it's very forward and boring and simple. But it wasn't. It was simple, but he used those simple tools to create a very complex beauty. It is not without its repetitiveness. You know, as we said earlier, track 10 did seem to wear a bit just because it was something we'd almost exactly heard. But that said, there was reason for it, and it still did kind of redeem itself. This is by far not an album I could listen to anytime. I don't know if I could listen to it again. Maybe certain songs, but it would definitely be hard because this is painful. Immediately after listening to this album, all I could think of is of a single person very important to me and being terrified of losing them tomorrow. And that's hard to deal with on a regular basis with as anxious of a person and paranoid of a person as I can be. But being forced into that emotional state so easily by this record because of how powerful it was absolutely terrifying. It can easily be overlooked, though. I think that's the one thing that we talked about, is if you're not paying attention, you could miss this whole record. And that's a problem. I don't think that that's a fault to Sufjan, because I don't think that it matters to what he was writing. However, I think that if you're not in the right frame of mind, or even if you're not paying enough attention, you could miss this record completely. It could just wash right over you. And I have to give it a little bit of a deduction for that, because we've said many times it should be the full package and it should be able to grab you somehow. And if you're not paying attention, you could miss the whole thing. It's hard to rate it against other stuff we've done, though, because this is kind of unlike anything we've done before, because it's the first time we've gotten a true personal story that had such heavy, heavy impact for me.
I would say this is the first time we got a true personal story that was really relatable.
Yeah.
And that was well done through and through, like not kind of beating around the bush here and there. It's just, you know right up front what it's about, and then it's just his exploring each and every aspect of that.
Yeah.
Very methodically.
Yeah. I think I have to bring it down a little bit just because, like I said, you could completely miss this record, and there were there was at least one moment where I felt myself still kind of wandering or wanting more. I don't know what that more was, but not much. It's only 25.25 below my highest rated record this year. This is a 4.5 for me. I can't rate it higher than that just because of certain factors, but it's one of the most emotional records on a whole, and definitely is one of the most emotional albums we've heard all year for sure. Easily.
I think I'm going to expand upon the certain factors, because I think I know what some of them are. It's musically so stripped down and distilled that I think it kind of suffers for that fact. I mean, that might be one of the reasons why people will gloss over it. It's so acoustic. It's so amazingly acoustic and well-formed, well-phrased. But there's not much on the music that really is speaking moment by moment to me as the emotional crux of the album. The long form of it, the melodies that he weaves in and out of his vocals is just phenomenal, and does a great job to speak to the theme and the arc and everything metaphorically and emotionally that's associated with this album. That, in that respect, it's a masterpiece. But I want more. There's so many parts where I can go, oh, that's great, and there's something going on there, and it's emotionally gripping, but I want something more musically, and I think that's my biggest critique. There's something musically that's just missing as a wow factor for it. It's a big, impactful story, but there's so few events in this story that are that wow factor that I can latch onto. A guitar solo, and I know a lot of that would actually detract from the album as a whole. That's my biggest problem, to really infuse a bunch of other instruments and flush out that 4 or 5 part band going on here. You don't need a bass in this album, no way. You don't really need that touching most of it, but it could have done something. You don't need percussion, but it could have done something. It's do you add it or do you subtract from it? And that's my main critique. I feel like at parts it really could have added to it. Most of the album was just nearly perfectly formed. But there are parts where I'm just like, do something. Give me something else. Just give me something a little bit more. That and the fact that really I only rate towards the high 5s when I feel like it's pushing the boundary. And that's the other thing. It's a great piece of art, but it's not anything new artistically. It's just a very beautiful expression of something I've already heard before. It's a near perfect expression of a folk grief album, which is pretty common. When you think about how folk loves to entwine emotions into it, when you talk about sadness, they do a great job, and this is damn awesome. But it's nothing new in that respect. So I'm right on the same page with Matt here. It's a 4.5. It's just a beautiful, great album that's, I think, kind of stuck with its heritage.
I don't know. I love my complexity in music and all that. And I think I'm pretty quick to judge albums that rely on what I would used to call, well, simple tricks, ditties, simple guitar riffs. Things that, sure, they provide the emotional punch through the simplest route. That's generally how I perceive music. It doesn't diminish the genre. It just means that I think very often in artists' exuberance to get an emotional thought out, perhaps as fresh as possible, they took the easiest avenue, which is, well, for a lone guitarist, they picked up their guitar and they started writing something. Maybe you could get a song out in 15 minutes if you're in the right zone. I think many of these tracks really could have been written fairly quickly, and I think I get the sense that they were. Or perhaps some were written in certain intervals over the course of the last 3 years. We know she passed away in 2012, and for a 2015 release, that seems like a fairly long time. Perhaps I could see some of the tracks at the end of this album being written with some kind of reflection in mind. Either way, I still see the core of the idea as being flushed out fairly quickly. But I think that it's also easy to look at that too simplistically. I think it's easy to kind of like pass that off as, that's easy, it's worthless, there's no artistic value. Or if there's artistic value, it's too thin to change the state of music. And the fact is, not everything is attempting to change the state of music. Everybody goes to music for different things. And I think this is the first album that I've really just been taken aback by how invested and how empathetic I remain, despite the fact that it's not really flashy in any stretch. It takes its time with every idea, it takes its time with every phrase, and then the heights that it reaches, which there are many on this album, even though there are heights that I don't really cite too often. Simple melodic phrases, that's a line that I keep going back throughout all of these songs. I think that there's a special talent to writing a very, very good melody that I think lots of people just gloss over. You know, they write melodies that fit whatever they're doing. They'll fit their lyrics, and then they'll focus on other things. They'll focus on their groove or their layers and their harmonies, and the melody will get lost on them. But Sufjan Stevens is a great melodicist. He's right up there with a recent artist we reviewed, the Decemberists. If perhaps he's a little bit harder to digest because he lacks that sort of overarching character that the Decemberists have cured over the years. It's really tough to rate this album because albums like these are so personal they defy comparison. Every step of the way, he wants to make you empathize with his plight. It's like that ultimate goal of every artist, like, well, please, someone else feel this with me. And with music, you have that power. Even if you don't know each other, you really are connecting with people in ways that I don't think many other artistic mediums can make possible. A direct artist-to-fan relationship. And I think that's what this album really, really hones. That I think it competes with what it lacks in a very, very strong way. There's no track on this album, shockingly enough, that I find to be a filler track. The only things that you have, perhaps, is just hopes that, like, well, maybe he would have done this, but that would have taken away from the goal. Maybe he could have done this here. No, but that really would have taken away from the goal. I truly do mean that the thinner he gets on this album, I think the better it gets. The more I feel. Times, that could seem like the easy way out. Sometimes, that's just being in tune with your artistry. And I think that's the true success here. I think, and perhaps after sitting with it for a while, this may change, but I think this is a solid 4.75 for me. I think it's higher just because he tapped into something that very few artists can manage. And to rate it lower than that, I don't know, might really say that the overall art of this album fails in comparison to other things that I think we've rated in like the 4.6, 4.7 territory that did have filler tracks and that we know struggled in moments, even though they could really pack a punch in other moments. They failed here and there, and there's just a fluidity here that I rarely see. The lack of it not being a 5 really is just by virtue of maybe John's point. It won't change worlds, and also Matt's point that I couldn't go back to this over and over and over. I think this is a special album for a special time, but used right, I think it's brilliant.
I'm going to pull a Steve here, which he hasn't actually done in a very long time. I'm actually changing my album level. I'm going to give it a 4.65. He's right. There's a lot more art here that props it up a lot higher than even what a 4.5 would be. Yeah. I
equate it almost similar to what we discussed with like the Kang Ding Ray thing. It's like, well, that really is an exercise in simplicity also, but sometimes it's the art that gets me in the end. It's not the overall.
All right. Then I guess
I'm trying to persuade you. I'm not.
No, but you make
you're the emotional one. You should have been like 5.8.
I'm just yapping.
You make a good point. Well, see, the reason
it's simply this. I was being true when I said I was in tears over, especially the first track here. There has not been an album this year that I really felt that. Times when I wanted to, but didn't.
I think that the biggest thing that's holding me back from giving it an even 4.75, though saying even 4.75 just sounds dumb. The reason that I can't give it that is because I did gloss over it the first couple times I listened to it. It was only till I sat with it more that I got that emotional part. And that's a real hindrance to an emotional album, is if you can gloss over it at all, you're missing something. So for me, it's a 4.7.
Okay.
4.65, 4.7, 4.75.
Yeah.
There you go. Good argument, Steve. Oh. Not that you were trying, but good argument.
You convinced me. Moving on, I think it was only natural to talk about death a little more. I mean, that's what this whole record's been about. We've all three of us here have dealt with death. I'm sure plenty of our listeners have too, and it's never an easy thing to handle, no matter when it happens, how it happens. But I think music is an integral part in coping, at least for me personally, and I'm sure these guys would agree. Some people write, as Sufjan does. He wrote a great album, birthed a great album out of something so tragic. For me, I listen to a lot of music to cope with a lot of things. It depends. If it's a person I knew personally, like a friend that I had lost when I was in college, she was a big fan of The Used and Nine Inch Nails. So I listened to a lot of that. I kind of buried myself in music that reminded me of her. And, it's hard and it hurts, but you come out on the other side. We've talked about depression before, and I've talked about how I bust through depression by making myself more depressed and breaking down and then building myself up.
Yeah, but death is a specific kind of depression, because in many ways it's the ultimate. There are people who can kind of like tune it out of existence and walk through their lives just, pretending like they're going to live forever. And in many ways that's kind of the only way to live. But you have to at least, address it when it comes, because more than likely, yes, people around you will die. It's just the odds are kind of stacked against it. I think that dealing with depression, as we discussed, that was back in episode 132 when we were with Painless Parker, and we discussed how you deal with depression through the use of music to try to bring you out of it, or maybe dwell in it, depending upon whether that's what you want to do. But death, very specific animal. What do you listen to if that's on your mind? Or do you listen to anything? Some people prefer the silence.
Well, I mean, the big difference between your standard types of depression, and no depression is standard, I would never make that claim, but between just regular depression and dealing with a depression brought on by death is you can quantify so many other types of sadness in your life.
Yeah, that's my point.
You can say, well, I'm sick, I can understand that. I mean, we can explain so much with science and philosophy and psychology, but death is still the, quote, great unknowable.
We all look for ways to, like, mend all those other things. You know, a well-balanced person will always try to seek ways, I suppose, to get themselves out of almost any other rut. But death is not a rut. When someone's in their grave, that's not a rut that they're, well, come on, man, you're staring at the tombstone, pick yourself up, get on, go. That's not how it works. That's kind of just something that we're all kind of forced to combat, that animalistic instinct to survive and get out of things and be happy and go mate, do things, eat, all these positive things that comprise life. And all of a sudden, with this one aspect, we're just expected to say, yup, I relinquish. I accept it. I am humble. Let's have it. And that's really the only way to take it. Because any other way would be rather self-destructive.
Well, it's also,
or rather, a waste of time.
I mean, it's where the 5 stages of grief really stem from, is dealing with death. And, I mean, some of those stages you just can't deal with, and it's not really until acceptance that you can truly move on. And that's where, when I've had to deal with it, I've actually started to turn to the art, specifically reading and music, because at that point, I want to start moving on. So what I'd like to do is actually revisit some of my favorite death scenes in Shakespeare. That's one thing I thoroughly love, is delving into that. Because when an author like Shakespeare, for me, he has the ability to do the duality, to make death meaningless in his plays, yet make them so impactful you have to invent meaning around it. What I take from music, though, is specifically like when my grandfather passed. He was a big Frankie Sinatra fan, so that's what I was listening to. I was connecting with him that way. And I wasn't a huge Sinatra fan then. I'm still not now, but you got to respect the guy. It's Frank Sinatra. And I was listening to music I'd never really listened to outside of me driving him around in his truck. The sort of CDs he threw on because he wanted to listen to his music, and that's my poppy. He was one of those stubborn old guys. But I dug out some of his favorites and was just blasting them for a little while, just to like kind of remember him and get insight into what he was, because, well, it was hard those last few years because of what was going on. And that was my final way of mourning, of really trying to move on at that point.
I think that music as a tool is very powerful, and I don't want to really repeat too much of what we did talk about in the Painless episode, but I think it's important to acknowledge that regardless of what you're going through, you're not the only one going through it, and that's what I think music replicates really well. Music replicates
camaraderie.
This relationship, the way you can relate to someone else. Like, that's why we were able to relate to this album this week, is because there's plenty of stuff he sang about that we all have felt. And I think that's important to always acknowledge in the pantheon of music.
Well, this album is a peculiar beast because it's, again, just sort of like straight from the horse's mouth. This is his feelings, and he's a songwriter. So how does he deal with it? He writes. Well, for anyone that's not a songwriter, not composer, well, you don't have that outlet. But then a lot of people have the other thing, which is just writing. Just, sit down, break out a notebook, and just write down your feelings. Sounds a little cliched, but that's actually very, very healthy. It's just, it can sometimes, like, when you see it outlined on paper, then all of a sudden that brings to life what you would otherwise maybe not reach if you were just caught in this loop in your head. You have the ability to kind of like reason it out as you would like in a term paper. It seems almost silly, like how can you compress that thing into something logical? But lots of people can. Very often we're just our brains are caught in cycles. When we stop and we take heed of certain things through the use of writing, we have the ability to get out. And then other people do that through the use of just listening and absorbing art. As you said, John, you listen to something, and that is really what I want to discuss is types of genres I think that you might use. There are certain people, for instance, that would advocate listening to something extremely positive. Well, don't dwell, but there's also a lot of I think benefit to dwelling. It's like the kind of, if you get it out all in one shot, then maybe you won't have to deal with it later. Otherwise, you're dealing with repression. But how long can that go on before that becomes a problem? You just, which way do you want to go with it? It's everyone has their different cutoff point.
Well, you have to confront grief, and this a lot of psychologists, if not most, if not all, will say you have to confront it. So that's when I like to pull out.
And that's a vague term, because what does that mean for you?
For me, it's bringing out a lot of the more depressing line of classic rock, which there's quite a bit of it that I thoroughly love to delve into at any point, but they really do a great job of putting me within a framework. It's also one of my favorite times to break out the punk. Gotta love that punk, because it's angry and
that's
it
right.
can
Mosh your grief away.
Well, anger is a great way and a terrible way to deal with grief, because when you get angry because of grief, it's one thing, but when you get angry at the grief, it's a way to focus against it, to really use it to push to push it away, to actually maybe turn it into an ulcer that you're going to have in 20 years, but at the same time to push it out of your mind.
Well, that would be repression, but maybe that's something as I kind of tried to address also. Sometimes that really is the only goal. Well, someone might argue that all forms of grief is really just, if you're going to live your life, then maybe you should just repress it, because that's all you're going to end up doing. And that's kind of what this album was sort of aiming at, is just like, well, if you can push it aside only so much, but it manifests, it becomes a part of you no matter what. It's a mixed bag.
I think what John's saying, though, and the most important message, though, regardless of the genre of music you listen to or what music you listen to, or if you listen to music at all, you do have to address it. How you address it, as Steve said, is different from person to person, but you can find that focus. And as we said,
might put on some classical music and just kind of like whitewash it with a kind of peaceful soundscape.
I think, though, ultimately, like the way we ended our discussion on the episode about depression here as well, it can never hurt to talk to somebody too. Odds are you know someone who's dealt with death, several people maybe. Reach out. Reach out to an artist you like on Twitter. Tell them that you are experiencing this grief. They might respond and help you through it too. You never know. Just reach out to somebody, because you shouldn't go through grief alone either. If you want to, you can, but there are always people to help you if you want it.
And also as an inspiration to any other budding artists out there, use what is at your disposal. The old phrase, write from life. That's one of the most important things. If you can tap into that, as today's artist was able to, in a really, really close, honest way, without kind of straying from the thought, then I think your chances of making it, or at least connecting with one other person. If making it is just playing in your local coffee shop and you connect with just one person there, which is probably one of the best, fan to artist forums, then go for it.
I think there's a good point to direct Steve towards our spam of the week.
Let's see if this is going to be depressing spam. That'd be fitting. But then they would know too much.
They would know too much.
You really make it appear really easy together with your presentation, but I find this matter to be actually one thing which I believe I might never understand. It seems too complex and extremely large for me. I am taking a look forward for your subsequent submit. I'll attempt to get the grasp of it. By torrent downloader.
Which torrent downloader?
No, just generic torrent downloader.
Because like Reactor torrents and other various websites that I don't want to mention because I don't want to get flagged by anybody, I mean, some of them are really, really good, but then you get your ISO hunts, which really suck.
They used to be good.
Yeah, it used to be good, but it's all sponsored
like
now.
08 to 10. Oh, great.
It's ridiculous.
Not that anyone here on this podcast encourages torrenting, because we don't, because it's illegal.
No, there's a ton of stuff you can legally torrent.
I know.
That's true.
All right?
That is true.
There's a ton of stuff you can legally torrent.
He found a loophole.
The next album we're doing is my pick, and I'm actually excited about this because Steve at length has mentioned this artist before, has fallen in and out of love with this artist, and it is Mr. Ben Gibbard and the rest of his band, Death Cab for Cutie.
Okay, I was going to tell you
mostly never in love, but
Right.
I admit it's all for like personal reasons.
it's Death Cab. They're kind of ever present,
They're everywhere,
especially in New York.
So they have a
Exactly.
brand new record called Kitsugi. Kintsugi. And it just came out,
Not too long ago.
yeah. And so I've been hearing about it. I had heard the single months
I was
ago.
going to suggest it to you.
This is
earlier.
his solo project.
No, this is Death Cab for Cutie.
Oh, it is Death Cab. Oh,
I
no,
just
didn't
said,
say.
I
Death
said
Cab.
Ben Gibbard and the rest of his band, Death Cab for Cutie.
Oh, gotcha.
When you listen back, you'll hear it. I said that.
Fair enough.
I said
He'll be listening back. He edits us.
it's true.
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, you chastised me for promoting the frontman, or in that case, front woman, unwarrantedly when there's a whole band there.
Yes.
So just use the band name. No, I'm not gonna lie though. I did that to Colin. I was all like Colin. Yeah.
Colin.
Colin along.
But anyway, so that's their new record, and I'm excited to do it because I am a fan of Death Cab. Although I still feel like their best album was Transatlanticism, which was a while ago. But the subsequent albums have been pretty good, and I like the single from this track, so I'm excited to hear the rest of the record.
Black Sun?
Black Sun is the single, yes.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I'm fearful because you got me for the word feels earlier,
Yeah.
and everyone I know that swoons over Death Cab for Cutie
Gets the feels.
They get their feels from
I don't
that.
swoon over them, but
I
I get the feels.
Yeah.
They got some feels.
Follow
in
You
them.
Into the Dark is a Death
Well,
song
maybe for
that's
once
really
I'll be the,
actually one
It's
of
pretty
those
good.
ones. Yeah, it's really good.
Maybe I'll be the naysayer. Who knows?
We'll see.
This time I bought into the feels. Maybe I'll repel them.
Well,
I don't know. I don't know
Anyway.
where my feels are gonna go.
That's the next album, so
hate this
we'll
word.
take care of that next time. And remember, folks, as always, music is life.
And life is good.
If you enjoyed this and other album analyses, topics, and guests, please subscribe to the Crash Chords podcast on iTunes, where you can also rate us and review us. For more media, also subscribe to Matt's one-on-one interview series, Crash Chords Autographs. To receive emails on all new content, subscribe at the top of our homepage. Also receive updates by liking us on Facebook, following us on Twitter at Crash Chords Web, our Tumblr, and our YouTube channel. And remember, keep the discussion going, because music is life, and life is good. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to share them in the comment board below each post. Otherwise, email us directly at admin@crashchords.com.